Hello and welcome to our latest cost of living podcast. And today, Hannah and I are joined by Mark, who has been working with Hannah on our latest consumer pulse survey that we've taken. We do these every quarter to try and understand what are the big issues facing consumers in the country at the moment. Now, the obvious timing of this is we wanted to actually look at people's feelings as we head into the key Christmas trading period and also Black Friday. So today we're going to cover Black Friday, so people's views on that, their thoughts on the cost of Christmas, so in the context of the cost of living challenges at the moment. And also, it's not just a time of a lot of retail, it's also a key period for our leisure clients, our food and beverage clients. So we're also going to look at changes to Christmas social habits that people are expecting. So it's based on a large survey. Hannah and Mark have been trawling through it. So if we start with Black Friday, what are the key takeaways you've seen on that?
Yeah, so interestingly, the thing that sticks out to me the most is the first question that we asked about Black Friday, which was whether you'd heard of it, how many people had actually heard of Black Friday. And actually, less than half of the people that we spoke to had even heard of it as an entity. So 47% of people. I think, Mark, we found this pretty surprising, didn't we? And then when we kind of dug a bit deeper in terms of those that had heard of Black Friday, the key connotations were actually pretty negative. 70% of people said that they believed it to just be a way of encouraging unnecessary consumerism. So that is the kind of key thing that people think of when they think of Black Friday. And I guess when researching Black Friday this year, most of the articles that came up were things such as which Best Buy indicates that only 1 in 7 Black Friday deals will actually save you money. There's quite a lot of negative press now. And actually, when you do Google Black Friday, that's the majority of the stuff that comes up. So yeah, it feels like Black Friday actually isn't necessarily going to be driving consumers this year.
No, I was really struck by that top line statistic you were talking about with familiarity. When we dug into some of the demographic splits, we saw that it does skew by affluence. The more affluent consumers are more likely to be familiar with Black Friday, but also they're more likely to be cynical along the lines you were describing. And that familiarity also peaks among slightly older groups. So Gen X had the most familiarity, but Gen Z respondents to our survey were least familiar. Only 39% of Gen Zers said that they really knew what Black Friday was.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense given that I think it kind of really had its heyday about 7 years ago. And think about Gen Z at that time, they would not have been doing their own Christmas shopping. And it really has kind of fallen out of general discourse when we talk about shopping. The other thing I thought was interesting, though, was of the kind of quite slim proportion of Gen Zs that did actually know what Black Friday was, they were the ones that were most likely to use it. They were the most likely to kind of try and be thrifty about saving some money in the run up to Christmas. So it's an interesting dynamic.
And did you ask the question around the day of Black Friday or the sort of general sales period of Black Friday? Because I think that's how it's migrated. It used to be one day. Now it seems to be everyone's offering Black Friday sales for seemingly a vast period of time.
Yeah, semantics are really difficult. So we're describing Black Friday as a generic event.
Yeah.
Because that it lapses into the full weekend. We have Black Friday sales that are called Black Friday, and that's how they're perceived by the consumer today.
But in summary, then, so there's cynicism around it, surprisingly little knowledge of it, but the younger consumers are more likely to be the ones who are actually benefiting from it by going out and making purchases, even though Which says they might not actually be benefiting because actually some of the deals aren't really what they say they are.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is the case. Millennials also probably of the same ilk, despite the fact that they've got slightly lower awareness. And I think, yeah, essentially, I mean, to be honest, most of the clients that I've spoken to, they do not engage with Black Friday anymore. They don't think it's an effective way of driving sales over the Christmas period. And I think that's reinforced by the fact that consumers don't necessarily want to engage with it as much anymore either.
Okay, really interesting. Okay, so bringing more onto the sort of cost of living elements, It's been a trend across this podcast for a year and a half or so now. So yeah, what are consumers' feelings as we head into Christmas in terms of the cost component?
Yeah, and we asked a very explicit question about how concerned people are about the increased cost of various things this Christmas, and two of those that really stood out for me were around food and drink and the cost of gifts. So 2/3, about 64% of people said they were concerned about the cost of food and drink this Christmas, and around half, 52% of them said they were concerned about the increased cost of gifts this Christmas. And again, I'm kind of struck by just how large those numbers are, because even though some of them are perhaps lower than they were this time last year, there's no media narrative that's supporting this level of concern at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess those are building on very high figures so last year had very high figures, and this is people still concerned and building on that.
People are still concerned. It feels like there's less of a panic from consumers compared to last year. We have seen the percentages of worry go down across most of the different product categories that we asked. I think what's interesting, though, is when you drill down by our Acorn segmentation, looking specifically at affluence there, and you see that actually, when you look at those lower income bands, that worry and that panic is still really, really high. And actually where it started to come down a bit is those middle and higher affluence groups who possibly, due to the economic circumstances over the last year, maybe feel now less worried about being able to spend that extra bit of money at Christmas. And so we're really seeing almost that polarization of how much money you have to spend, and therefore how worried you are about things like this at Christmas, really starting to emerge this year.
Well, actually, if you think about it, this time last year was the fiscal event moment, the Liz Truss, etc. mini budget, and I seem to remember we actually did our survey almost like the week that happened. So I guess figures may still be high, but they weren't then less high compared to the sort of doom mongering of that time last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the kind of consumer confidence index, that was the lowest point in recent history that we've had that specific bit after the mini budget. Whereas now where we're at in terms of consumer confidence is around the same time that we were in during lockdown 1 when the economy shut down. So we're not in a kind of great position still. It's still pretty low, but yet we are seeing that generally drift up.
And you alluded to the demographics there. So you're saying the sort of more middle income, higher income are slightly less concerned. Just to unpack that, the lower income groups are seeing the biggest levels of concerns.
Yeah, exactly. So just to give some perspective to that, so low income living, 68% of them are worried about the cost of F&B this Christmas. And in comparison to that, only 51% are worried within the established affluence group. So they're both still really high percentages, but those differences were much, much lower last year, whereas this year we're kind of seeing that stretching out of worry impacting different income groups, I guess, in different ways. And people are potentially dipping into savings. People from higher brackets of income are potentially more likely to work in the private sector. So they might have seen pay rises over the last year, which will be impacting how much money they have to spend. But we obviously know that this is not an equal impact on everyone.
Yeah, and another aspect of that question that's perhaps, again, going under the radar in the media at the moment is around the cost of energy. 70% of the people responding to this survey said that they were somewhat or very concerned about the cost of energy this Christmas. And related to that, 41% of people expect their fuel costs this Christmas to be higher than they were last year, despite Ofgem saying that actually across the board generally it should be cheaper year on year.
Okay, interesting perceptions there, isn't it? Okay, and now you touched on F&B, so food and beverage, just there, Hannah, in one of your stats. So, how do you feel, or what's the survey saying is going to be the impact on the leisure sector this Christmas?
So that was quite an interesting one, because last year I think our key headlines were that was the activity that people were going to be scaling back the most to try and cope with that cost of living crisis, and particularly around Christmas. In terms of what people are saying this year, now there are much there are greater proportions of people saying that their priority this Christmas is to see friends and family outside of the home and do leisure activities. And that's across the board. That's not just young people driving that. Young people drive it to a greater extent, comparative to older groups. But generally speaking, we're seeing people with a lot more kind of enthusiasm towards doing that sociable stuff. So we're probably going to see more sociable activity outside of the home this Christmas in comparison to last, which is a good thing for the leisure and food and beverage sector, and possibly indicates that, you know, people are just making consolidations in other places so that they can do that activity, because possibly they missed out on it last Christmas. They realised how important it was to them in terms of enjoying the festive period, and so now they're going to try and prioritise it a little bit more.
Yeah. Just to put some numbers on that, so the number of people who felt like financial restrictions were going to affect their ability to see friends and family, that was down year on year from 36% to 28%. And as Hannah said, that number was reducing across every demographic group, not just in terms of affluence, but in terms of age as well. So there must be some extent to which this is sort of continued mental loosening of sort of lockdown effects, as it were.
Okay, really interesting. Yeah. Anything else that you want to raise on either that point, or anything else, sort of key headlines that you had coming out of the survey? Because I know you've got a raft of data there.
One that stuck out to me was how much 16 to 24-year-olds, over a third of them, so 38% of them, prefer New Year's Eve to Christmas Day. And it's not necessarily two events we necessarily think of in the same way, but actually that's a huge growth on last year. So those Gen Zs are really deciding, actually, New Year's Eve is a really important day for me. It ties in with this sociable element again. And they're really starting to prioritise, you know, those fun night out activities with their friends, no matter what, you know, how their New Year's Eve materialises to them. It feels like there's a big push in that direction.
Yeah, and I suppose the final thing for me, I suppose, related to that same demographic group, the younger consumers, had some interesting things to say about their shopping habits. We're looking at the gradual shift back to store shopping for Christmas this year. The high level number was talking about the people doing 44% of people using stores for most of their shopping, but 60% of millennials and 60% of Gen Z respondents said they're potentially put off by how busy stores will be. And I realize, going through some of these numbers, that many of them won't have had a store shopping experience independently when they were, you know, they might have been in their late teens and early 20s when pre-COVID. Now coming into the point where they're more financially independent, looking to shop for themselves, they are very aware of how busy stores can be, and that's off-putting to them. But on the other hand, they're really interested in getting experiences that are going to supplement their shopping. So, you know, going to a destination or tying it in with an event, say, is a much more attractive experience for the younger shopper.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, because you tend to sort of talk about older shoppers and the challenges between them moving online and wanting to go in store. But you flagged a group there that strangely have never been out there doing proper shopping. So so we need to train young people in how to shop, do we?
Yeah, I think just on that channel point as well, given that we're talking about it, there's this incredible contrast between high affluence and low affluence groups in terms of where they want to do their predominant Christmas shop this year. Affluent people generally are much more skewed towards online shopping. They want that convenient. 58% of them said that they wanted to shop online because it's just more convenient to them. It'll come to their house. That shifts all the way the other way when you look at the lower affluence groups. Twice as many want to do that shopping in store versus online. And I think we did talk about it last year, that list shopping behavior where you make a predetermined list, you know roughly how much you want to spend on each of those things, and you can stick to it in store because you're kind of distracted by less choice like you get online. We're seeing that behavior continue. So I feel that feels like something that's starting to embed as an activity, and actually a real win for in-store shopping versus online, I would say.
Okay, fascinating. Now, I know that you two could go on for ages and you've got a huge amount of stuff. I think what will be really interesting is in the new year, we can actually, and we have a podcast lined up, I think it's in February, where we will look at our brand dimensions data that actually uses transactional data to see what did happen. Because it's all very well X% saying they will shop in store. We can actually see what that was. So we look forward to feeding you back to you on that in the new year. But as I said, these guys have got huge amounts more data. We are going to be producing more detailed analysis of that survey. Please, if you would like to see more focused findings that are more relevant to you, please talk to your account manager and they will tailor some content to you and talk you through it. We have so much that we can't cover it here, and we don't want to at this stage just sort of bombard people with a single pack of stuff that covers everything from retail to leisure and so on. So please get in touch with your account manager. They would love to share that. And really, that brings us to the end of this podcast. We look forward to catching up in the new year. I can't believe I'm saying that as I do this. But yeah, we will be feeding back on how Christmas actually went, looking at various measures. But yeah, we wish you well in the meantime. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Cheers.